I'm going to invest in myself, create my own company, really invest in my own brand. And if I'm doing a podcast, I'm going to find a way to pay for it myself. Because then I own it and I control it.
Hello, and welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, a podcast about the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belenky of NJB Media, a podcast audience development strategist.
And I'm John Kiernan of Podhouse Productions, an all-in-one podcast consultation and editing platform. We're co-hosts on this journey into the world of podcasting as a monetization tool.
Whether you're building branded content, scaling a podcast network, or you're just getting into the podcasting industry, PodBiz breaks down the strategies, tech, and mindset behind podcast success.
We're bringing you insider tips, real talk with industry professionals, strategies that actually work, and talking all about the things that we've seen in the trenches.
So if you're ready to go beyond the downloads and build real impact with your podcast,
then hit subscribe and let's get down to PodBiz.
Welcome to PodBiz. Today we're joined by Nigeri Eaton, CEO of Type C Studios. Nigeri, thank you so much for joining us here on PodBiz.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and I love the show. I'm so glad and flattered to be asked.
We are thrilled to have you here today. We're going to get into it in a little bit, but your journey, everywhere you've worked, all the amazing creative work that you have produced in the world of podcasting and audio in general. But let's get straight into the $1 million question. Nigeri, where's the money in podcasting?
That's a great question. And I feel like it's a question where the answer changes every couple of months.
Yeah.
But for right now, and for, I think, companies like mine and Type C, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in production services, work for hire. When I was at Wondery, when I first started, my job was head of co-productions. So a lot of my role was to oversee existing partnerships with places like Bloomberg or Advanced Local Media. They just set a first look deal with, and go out to new media company, or news organizations to create new partnerships for co-productions, film and series. And I would see, it was almost like clockwork. It was like not if there was going to be layoffs, but when. Every conversation, start with different news organizations, whether it's Washington Post or Intercept or other places, within a couple months of things getting going, layoffs. And more often than that, of course, the audio department were the ones that were gotten rid of first. But that doesn't mean that a company's podcast ambitions ended. It's just that they no longer wanted to support having full-time employees, which that's a whole nother discussion for another day. But I saw that there's still companies that want high quality narrative storytelling done. But they want it to be effortless for them. They want someone to come in and be like, let us take over and do it for you. So that's really where we're focusing all of our energy for our first year of Type C. And we're really lucky to be partnering with great clients and doing that work. I think the other area where there's money is creators who have seen the chaos happening across TV, film, and podcasts, and have decided those cushy deals that we're seeing a couple years ago, those aren't happening unless you're A-list. So I'm going to invest in myself, create my own company, really invest in my own brand. And if I'm doing a podcast, I'm going to find a way to pay for it myself. Because then I own it and I control it. And there's a lot of opportunities to work with people who are doing that right now and want to grow their show and reach bigger audiences, or people who are understanding that's the pathway forward and they want to find the right partner to work with. And so that's also been an area for us. And I really think that's an area for a lot of people who are still working in podcasts and have businesses or are independent producers. But I think the days of working with these big companies, they're still around, but the money is not the money that it used to be.
No, it's so interesting, right? Because great content is valuable, right? Especially in the age of AI slop, right? Just in the age of did an AI write this? That's why I try and do a live post on LinkedIn every Friday, a video of just my face, because there's just so much content, even in the B2B space on LinkedIn, of thought leadership posts, right? And so, when you think of B2C content and just the wider landscape that we all work in, there's just so much out there that's who wrote this, And so I think that good content still stands on its own, right? You can, we're still at the point where you can differentiate it. And I think also, things like intuition and human instinct factor in a lot more than maybe we want to talk about today. But it is something where great content is still really valuable, but a lot of companies, a lot of legacy media do not want to pay for full-time employees. It's real. Yeah, it's so real. And so many content creators out there, or even people who've had radio backgrounds or narrative audio backgrounds, or who've maybe, started a career in podcasting, get to a certain level, and then like the bottom drops out, right? And they're just like, oh God, what do I do? I don't have a job in this economy. And so it's rough. And at the same time, I think it is one of those things where if financially you can say, okay, I'm going to start my own thing, or I have the relationships in place, or I have the career trajectory over several years to do that, it is also an exciting time to say, hey, I'm going to own my own work, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to pitch work, not at an employee rate, but at a freelancer rate, which is higher, and say, I'm going to make this as easy for you as possible. Write the check.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is the pathway for it. Yeah. Because what's really, really heartbreaking to see in all this, especially, coming from Wondery, where so many people were laid off, people who have spent years making incredible shows that win awards, shows that reach big audiences, have top the charts, and as producers are struggling to get interviews.
Yeah.
And so, I tell some of these people all the time, it's like, I'm sorry, fuck that. Like, you don't want to work at this place anymore and give away all of your ideas and all of your IP. Like, I totally believe you can go out on your own. Like, we'll figure out a way together to make this happen, because you're too talented to, shift into the medical industry, which I know people are doing. Like, and I don't fault that for people, because you also have to live and find a way to live in this
shift into the medical industry.
Oh yeah, there are people I know who've gone from being producers to like going to nursing school.
Oh yeah, because, that makes sense. That's inflation proof.
So,
got it.
Yeah. So so yeah,
total gear shift.
Total gear shift, right? And I was like, do I need to be doing this? It's like, no, I can't even look at a needle going into my own arm. What am I doing in the medical field? So
for everyone out there who's looking for podcast work, you may want to become a nurse, but you don't have to. Yeah.
You don't have to. You don't have to. Let's find out, let's all help each other kind of find our way through this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that Wondery cut last year was brutal. I mean, just brutal. And, I think a lot of people for a long time, myself included, were kind of wondering how they kept the lights on, right? It was one of those things where the idea of paying for the Wondery app wasn't necessarily something where, maybe there was one or two shows where you liked and you might subscribe or you might do a trial, but it just didn't seem like it was something that was sustainably marketed. Being on the inside, what was your take on that?
But though, I would say that the Wondery Plus app was actually really successful. I think it was one of the biggest podcast subscriber channels on Apple, right? And so, and the thing that did really well actually were limited series, because people like the limited series. You get early access.
Yeah.
And like every month there's different offering. There's a Wondery original or be like a partner show. So it actually was, I think, especially in podcasts, quite successful. And I think that's, when I went over to Wondery from Netflix, is like, the thing that Wondery seemed to have nailed more than anyone else is that kind of three-legged stool, right? It's like a revenue. It's the podcasts, ads, subscriptions, the app, and then IP. And so the idea is like, even if one of those legs is kind of faltering, you got these two other legs. But I think the challenge is like two of those things are faltering, right? Ad revenue, that business is always fluctuating, and going with the wind. But then you had like the two strikes in Hollywood, and then these streamers are deciding to make less original content, or the content they're making was going to be a lot different than what they were buying before. So I think those two things make the whole kind of three-legged stool a little bit wobbly.
Yeah, and you don't have triangulation. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I think it's something where, we all want in a perfect world, large companies to be able to invest in beautiful narrative work, right? Just like call the sound designers, we want 20 people touching an episode and having just a beautiful thing made. And at the same time, that isn't always realistic for the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. But I also think, and this has been true of every place I've been, right? It's why a portfolio approach is really important. right? You still have your shows that are, maybe it's less intensive production wise. And they, you have more episodes. It's a show that is really sponsor friendly. And then you can still invest in those shows that are a little bit more a chance. But like, I always think about what is the thing that made you fall in love with doing podcasts? And are we still making that? And that's not to say that like, I love all kinds of shows, but the thing that made me be like lean in and be like, hold the phone. This is what we could be doing, right? Are kind of the narrative limited series, are the narrative weekly shows, right? And so I mean,
that's how a lot of people discovered podcasting, the serial effect.
Yeah. And so I would hate, maybe I'm too in the bubble of podcasting to really understand how most daily people see podcasts, but I would hate if the only messaging they're getting is that the only shows worth putting out and investing in are the easiest shows to make.
The low-hanging
the talk
fruit.
shows, the interview shows, right? And I love those shows as much as anyone else, but like, I love a variety. I love a Marvel movie and I love a A24 movie. So let's just give people the range.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that work is unachievable. I think it just looks different, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think in this economy, it just looks different, right? Where you're not seeing larger companies invest in that work. You're seeing independent production companies maybe partner to put it out, maybe put it out and get sponsorship, maybe put it out and, sell it, maybe put it out and market it themselves. And it's a very interesting time because, I remember like podcast movement Dallas 2002, right? And I make this reference all the time on the show. Like
2000.
Yeah, sorry. 2022. Yes. I remember, not 2002. Sorry. Nope. I was in high school. No, 2022 Dallas podcast movement. I remember this feeling of like, it almost felt like someone was walking around with an invisible money gun. Minimum guarantees, and it was just this kind of wild, wild west moment of like, oh, if you're a content creator and you have, you can prove that you can make decent work, someone will write you a blank check. That was the feeling. And I don't know if that's kind of the wave of where we are with our industry. I don't know if it's, just economic pressure of where the entire world is right now, but it does seem to be something where a lot of people who make great work aren't finding large homes. They're having to build their own cabins. Yeah.
PodBiz is brought to you by Lean and Loaf, our video podcast partner. Because running a podcast is so much work outside of just recording a podcast.
Lean and Loaf handles our entire post-production pipeline, getting everything platform ready. That way we're not chasing files or managing editing timelines every week.
We really recommend Lean and Loaf. It's been phenomenal. We're a 2-man team. And so for us, it's been fantastic to have the additional support to focus on the content of the show and the incredible guests we've had on.
And really get down to answering the question that you want to know the answer to. Where is the money in podcasting?
Lean and Loaf is trusted by some of the biggest names in the podcasting industry. So we're in really good company with folks like iHeart, HBO, and Netflix.
If you want to take a load off and take your podcast to the next level, head on over to leanandloaf.com.
I mean, I think it's really like the kind of like the chickens coming home to roost. Like everyone was kind of throwing out money across the media landscape until, I think those strikes, and even before that, with Spotify shutting down their studios, they were like, it's all about what the investors, like what investors were, I think, impatient. I want a return on my money. And I could totally understand that in some senses, right? But that was the vibe. And we all felt that it was going to happen. Like there's going to be like kind of this moment of contraction, right?
A course correction,
course
market correction.
But I don't think we understood how much it'd be like a rolling impact. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And, it is interesting, I think, when economic pressure forces people to just totally pivot, right? I remember, the Great Recession, people went to graduate school because they couldn't get jobs, right? Like it was just insane. And like the entire trajectory of a lot of millennials' lives are just different now because of it.
By the way, I went to grad school. I entered grad school August 2008 when the recession was really just getting going. And I went to journalism school. And the week we started, like 3 major daily newspapers closed. And I was like, well, this is a great sign to enter journalism. But I'm still at it. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think it's one of those things where in podcasting, you never really know what is going to lead to what, right? I talk about this with a lot of our guests here. We're a young industry. most people who work in podcasting, maybe I've only talked to one or two who've had an entire career in podcasting. And even then they're 100% under 40, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody is coming at it from a different place, right? Whether it's, there are some NPR radio folks, which you are, right? We'll talk about that in a bit. But that's a very small club. And I talked to a lot of people that were like, I couldn't get in at NPR,
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
And there's a lot of people like that. And then there's people who come from radio. There's people who come from digital media. There's people who have marketing backgrounds. There's people who just had their own podcast and stumbled into it, And so I think we're still a young enough industry that everybody's journey looks different. And I want to hear a little bit about, when you started coming up, because like you said, you went to journalism school and then you started at NPR. So what was that like?
Yeah. Well, between the NPR journalism school, I worked in documentary film.
Yep.
So I spent 10 years doing that. And I never
I didn't realize it was a decade. I knew you worked in documentaries. I just didn't know it was a decade.
It was clean all the time before grad school. And I never thought I was going to be working in audio. And I never listened to NPR, and they reached out to me. They recruited me for a position. And I unintentionally negged the then senior vice president of programming, Anya Grundman. And I was like, I don't know. I read 3 newspapers in bed every day when I wake up. I watch news. I watch documentary films. I never listen to NPR because I do not hear anyone that sounds like me. And I do not think you make content for people like me and mine. And then they offered me the job. And I was like, oh, okay. Because of my job previously, I was working at this company called Independent Television Service. It's a nonprofit that funds documentary films. For public television. And big focus, right, was always bringing younger and more diverse filmmakers to PBS. So it's now just like Henry Louis
Ken
Gates
Burns.
and Ken Burns.
I love a Ken Burns, but you watch those documentaries and you're like, I don't think this is the only narrative.
No.
That exists. But there is almost like an authoritative tone to his, not to go down that rabbit hole, but when you're watching a Ken Burns documentary, it's almost that you feel like you're in a history class. And I think, as we grow older in the world, it's important to realize that the one narrative that everybody seems to know isn't always the only narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, really appreciate Ken Burns' impact. Also,
stunning work.
Also, man, you've got all the money. You've got one perspective and kind of one style. Let's diversify it. And so I did that really, I think, effectively at NPR, PBS. So early television, so they brought me over to do that same thing at NPR. And so even though it was really different, a story is a story. And I'm really good at building teams, connected teams, and making things happen. And so it was pretty seamless then transition. And I just loved working at NPR. Everyone there was so committed and so smart and cared so much about the institution. And it was inspiring to be around people like that. And then working under Anya Grundman and then my then boss, Steve Nelson, who now works at Lanata, it was just you want to do this? Okay, let's find ways to make it work. And so it really felt like could make things happen in an environment like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for everybody who came up through NPR and even BBC, there's this extent of you made it, you're in the club, let's get to work, right? It's very, very cool. And for a long time, it was really, NPR was probably there are a few other national radio stations that had that kind of up and coming energy, right? WBUR, WNYC, right? There's a few, but NPR really it's the national one. And it's also one of those things where it really set the tone. And I think a lot of people really looked to NPR even before podcasting was mainstream as, kind of the real placeholder of taste in a certain way culturally. And so I think that there probably was that internal standard. Absolutely.
Yeah. For sure.
Very cool. Very, very cool. And, from there, I think you were recruited to work at Apple in the pandemic.
Yes. That was a wild time. I mean, it was June 2020, in which between the protests happening across the country and the pandemic, we were all kind of just losing our minds. And I get an email from Apple and I was pretty sure this is a phishing scam, but okay, let's go through with it. And it wasn't. So
I love this. The trick to getting great jobs is just to doubt everything and everyone. Fabulous.
Yeah. No, it was not that you're looking for validation, but it was still great to okay, if someone from Apple Podcasts is reaching out to me. Like they're seeing like the work that I'm putting in over here. And I think I can be helpful at another capacity over here.
Yeah.
And I've been saying for years, at that point, it's been my entire life working in nonprofits, like every full-time job I had.
Yeah.
I think I've been saying, like, I started saying, like, I don't want to work for like a for-profit. Like, that,
Yeah.
like, let's like to like make money and do this work. Like have a budget and do this work.
Yeah.
So that was appeal of Apple. Although I always tell people, I never spent a single dollar at Apple. Because my job wasn't to make content. My job was to advise other teams on their podcast strategies. Even though, NPR's, minuscule budget compared to Apple. Yeah, I spent a lot more of NPR's money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Apple just also is such a large tech company, and I think they pay attention more than they let on. Right? It's a very conservative company, but the technology has really shaped the podcasting industry from day one. Right? I mean, the reason we all listen to podcasts is in part because we had the Apple Podcasts or iPodcasts on our iPhones. Right. And there's a lot of carryover even today. Right. The average podcast listener has a higher income per capita because they more likely own an iPhone, which is more expensive, right? So there's a lot of cultural impact that Apple has. That being said, though, there's so much synergy possible with their different products, right? It must have been really fun to work across products, across teams, and to have a little bit of influence and impact in terms of the synergy that you were able to make. Maybe it was across books, maybe it was across music, just to tap in some of those worlds and to connect them with each other.
Well, the challenge, there's a couple of challenges, right? One is that there's a pandemic. So I also never set foot inside of Apple. I never worked in the Apple office the entire time I was there, right? Which allows for more of that natural, like kind of back and forth.
Yeah.
Two, Apple is conservative culture, but also it's a pretty, for like a bad word, secretive culture, right?
Yeah,
because sometimes like
siloed. Siloed.
Not just siloed, but like remember the Time to Walk? They still do them, but they use them more. They're getting ready to launch Time to Walk on the fitness app, which is essentially like it's an audio product, right? And I knew people who were hired who came from podcasts, now working at Apple, but they couldn't tell me what they were working on because you have to get like an NDA for like certain projects, and then they could know what I was working on, and vice versa. So sometimes, like, yes, if that wasn't part of the culture, oh my God, I can only imagine how much crossover there would be. Yeah. But because of the level of secrecy that's implicit in Apple, it's really hard to make that happen. But I did get to work quite a bit with Apple Music, TV Plus, books, just looking at news, so having conversations with retail about their podcast strategy. It was fun to kind of dream big, especially like with the retail about like what could that look like for them, especially thinking about like something that could work across the globe for their stores. So that was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've previously heard you mention, a little bit about I think it was the Oprah podcast with the book. Is that right? With the audiobook?
Yeah. So a couple weeks after I started, Oprah named Cass by Isabel Wilkerson. Wilkerson is her book club pick. And I love The Warmth of Other Suns so much. And so I was like, Ray can read.
She's a fantastic author. Yeah.
Oh my God. So great. And then, the books team were like, we should do a podcast with Oprah. And like, great, we're going to get done and have it be released in like 2 weeks. So, well, okay, this is going to be very, very quick, but to have a really big impact, especially again, because we're coming out of the summer, like that summer racial reckoning. This is the exact right time.
And it was also kind of really on the edge of what people were doing, right? Because Spotify is doing that now, right? Spotify launched audiobooks more recently than Apple. And now you're seeing a podcast comes out and it mentions the book, and here's the audiobook, and here's the link, and it's you're seeing that synergy, and they're doing it well, but it is second wave for sure. I think Apple really kind of led the zeitgeist on that. Yeah,
and I will say this was stuff that was starting to be teed up before I ever got there, right? So even like Apple TV, I think they were like 1 year into launching their shows. But knew really quickly, like, we have to start doing companion content, right? And then it's just about like kind of making sure the timing works and coming out exactly with the series. Like, how do we get the podcasts on the TV app so people know they exist and vice versa? And so all those things were like things that had to be sorted out and worked out and like approved upon. But yeah, it's really exciting when all those elements start coming together.
Absolutely. And it also seems like that's maybe the first experience you had moving from content to product.
Yeah. Yeah, that is one of the first experiences of content product. Yeah. Although I would say also when I worked at ITVS, we had a product called OV, which was like a community watching app. So like you could watch a documentary film live with people across country and like interact in the chats and with the filmmakers. But yeah, and I think really to me, it's about like how do we just maximize potential to connect audiences with a podcast that they wouldn't already be on their radar. And then to me, like the really important thing is like how you start building community in these spaces with these products.
How do you start building community with those kind of products?
That's a great question. And I don't think one that's been fully answered yet, right? Because it's really interesting. Like when you look at like how now that everyone's listening to podcasts on YouTube, or watching podcasts on YouTube, like how much
what's the definition there? We can talk about that later.
Yeah. There's that, like you see that, Spotify will up their comments on podcasts. There's a lot more engagement than you see in Apple, right? But I love a good like podcast Discord. So but when you look at like app like Netflix, how could you build that engagement? And I think for them, it's more like engagement around. It's more about like the app than building community. But I wish there was more attention to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because after Apple, you went to Netflix.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, Netflix has been really interesting with their strategy of To Doom, right? And that's the name of their sound. And for anybody out there who, there is actually a great 20,000 Hertz episode on the To Doom sound. So that's what I'm referring to for anybody out there who wants to real audio nerd down the rabbit hole. But, I feel like they've done a really great job of creating companion content and fan content, right, around a lot of their shows. Specifically, the one that immediately comes to mind is Bridgerton, right? Just the Bridgerton fan casts are just so well received widely out there. And you're right, it seems like there is a pivot to amplify app usage via mobile phone through those content channels.
Yeah. That's new, right? And also I remember Shonda Rhimes, her podcast deal was with iHeart. And so I remember, I was at Netflix when I think probably even the first season of Bridgerton was out. And I was like, because you have an overall deal with Shonda Rhimes, how come you don't have her podcast? Like, we don't want her podcast. Like, you should want her podcast. Like, she has the most like engaged fandom in all of television. Yes. I was part of like Black Twitter scandal nights on Thursday and How to Get Away with Murder. Bring it over here. And after I left, I'm not sure what happened first, whether, the deal was iHeart in it. And she said, not to renew, but it's to Netflix. And by that point, Netflix was making this real investment in podcast and app and real investment in video podcasts. But it just makes all the sense in the world.
It makes so much sense. And I think from a platform background, right? A lot of platforms are, once you strike gold, you don't want to alienate your fan base, right? You don't want to alienate your membership base. And at the same time, everybody is consuming content from creators they love across platforms, right? Like across. Yeah. There aren't like the amount of time you go from doom scroll to podcast to Netflix to YouTube to Spotify for the same creator is common these days, right? And it's becoming more and more common as I think as we, enter this kind of like incestuous just media landscape. Yeah. And it's very interesting.
Yeah. I know. And I this is where I get my soapbox where I'm like, yes. And I still think Netflix can be even more with the original podcast content.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah.
Which is the whole reason why I took the job in the first place. I said like, hey, I can make companion content. This would be really fun. But to me, this is where the real opportunity is. And that would be a revolutionary change.
Pivoting the app as a major podcast distribution. Yep. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Original narrative, right? Because they have like a Pete Davidson show, right?
Yeah.
And so I hope that, if kind of in year one of this trial, like there's opportunity to expand in different areas and different content. So I would love to see that from Netflix.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting, right? And when I saw that you moved from Apple to Netflix, I thought, I wonder what that's going to look like. I wonder what original content that's going to look like. And the fact that they created, fan casts and a lot of partner casts to their shows was smart. But to be honest, between you and I and everyone listening to this episode of PodBiz, I really thought you were going to come on and create original content for them and they were going to make a play like Spotify. That was my thinking, right? When I saw that you had been recruited as head of audio and podcast programming, I was like, okay, They're going to let her cook. She's going to get to work. Like, what kind of work are they going to make? And it's interesting, right? And, obviously, when you're working for these large companies, they move very slowly sometimes. It's like a cargo ship, right? And smaller companies get to move like sailboats, right? Or even like dolphins swimming around the ocean. But large companies, sometimes even ones that are revolutionary in our tech and do move fast, sometimes new concepts take buy-in and it can take years.
That's one of the things I want to do. But, that job sat on what they call the editorial and publishing team, which is part of marketing, right? They're already doing companion podcasts before I got there. And here's one I'll shout out. Ray Bada, who started off on the marketing team, was there like 7 years before I was, and was like, hey, we should do podcasts. So all those early podcasts were because of Ray. And it takes so to me, I kind of come up with a plan at every job. And I was like, okay, first I want to create some more standardization and processes around some of our podcasts, because some of them are publishing on a regular cadence, some were not being invested in properly, so I was like, okay, first you're really going to focus on getting rid of shows aren't working, really growing the shows that are working, current slate, and then figuring out how to do more ambitious work. So I was able to quickly grow the audience. The first show I developed there and pitch was We Had the Receipt, which was a weekly video podcast. At the time, I think their very first video podcast that was just about their non-scripted programming, and it was started at the same time as Season 2 of Love is Blind, was already a massive hit. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to start doing what I can to get podcasts on the apps, even a mention, right? Because HBO was the precursor, it's the one that set the standard of before episodes of Insecure starts, you put a card up saying you can listen to a podcast, right? Or it's an app. And so then it's how do we kind of get podcasts in apps? So that was a thing. And I had a whole presentation on what the podcast structure was going to be for next year. And I presented to my boss, and I presented to the CMO, who was at that time was Norma St. John. And I was like, this is great. Bose is in it. She's like, she's going to support me. Then 2 days later, they let her go. And then there's waves and waves of layoffs, and they demolished my department and we had publicity. So it's one of those things where it's when you have that much change in an organization, you're kind of taking a couple steps back in the cultural capital you've been building.
Yeah.
And I would have stayed at Netflix and kind of written it out, except that I got pregnant, which is a very great thing. So I was, hoping for praying on for years. And then right before I was going to give birth, my landlord was like, we're selling our house. And I couldn't find a house. And the idea of then just all this uncertainty and there's all these layoffs. Okay, I need to move. And Netflix doesn't let you work remotely. So, I need to look for a job that'll let me be closer to my family, have more stability, can afford to buy a house.
Yeah.
And that kind of means leaving Netflix.
Yeah. I also think sometimes, those things happen for a reason, right? It's one of those things where also, the idea that everybody can have it all. And we've talked about this previously, actually, in our episode with Sam Sethi. We talked a lot about how, a lot of even entrepreneurs on the platform side and, kind of who have complementary platforms and products to Apple, they're really successful because they have wives that are raising their kids, that are cooking them dinner, that are doing their laundry. And so when you think about having a big career, right, and having kids, there's a balance. And sometimes you have to take a break.
Yeah. I mean, not just take a break, although I did take a really great long maternity leave, thanks to Netflix. But to me, it's always how do I reorient my life and career so I can be the kind of mom that I want to be? That's still a major driver of how we set up Type C. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell us a little bit about Type C. So this is now your production company. So you've come from a lot of different organizations doing a lot of different things, right? Creating content, working with product, working on platform synergy, and now you're back to your original love, which is creating great content. So tell us what that has felt like and what the journey's been like, because also, you're pretty well known in the podcasting industry for working for a bunch of big players, but now you kind of get to make the work, I would hope, that you want to make.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. When I got laid off from Amazon, part of it was I was devastated for everyone who lost their jobs. And I was particularly worried about people who I matched on my team. It's like 12 people were laid off. And, that care for the people doesn't shut off automatically.
No.
And so that was
that's just so heartbreaking. And also, we're a young industry. Dane Cardiel from Good Tape came on and he said this thing that I've quoted a bunch of times, which is, we're all just growing old together.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think when you leave a job, we're such a small industry that we all still know each other and we all still work together. And it's just, sometimes it's important to just check up on people and make sure they're okay.
Absolutely. And I still check up on people. I mean, I'm still I saw some from my team in New York. I mean, several people. I was in New York earlier this week, but also part of the layoff was a relief because I was like, okay, I already started working there. I was like, that's my last corporate job. Like Amazon is like one of the most corporate places I've ever worked at. I don't want to go to another place and be like, do you use Teams or do you use Zoom or do you use I just didn't want any of that rigmarole anymore. And also 2 weeks after the layoffs, my dad got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So I was like, my life is going to change a lot. My dad is here 25 minutes from my parents. I have to be available and things will only get more challenging throughout the year. So I can't keep chasing a corporate ladder, nor do I want to. So I have to create a company that allows me to do something different. And I think because I've worked at all these places and I've had in these roles where I've had a partner in a variety of different ways with a variety of different companies and people and places, it wasn't that scary actually to say, all right, I'm going to start this.
Yeah. When you're looking at budgets, right? When you're the head of a limited series and you look at how much stuff costs, you know what to pitch for, right?
Yeah.
I think that that's a major consideration, right? A lot of people who start out and have their own production company or freelancing, they don't know what to charge, right? And so I think having that insight of saying like, okay, not only am I known for doing great work, but I understand the business process and the value of this work and how it's distributed and how it's used and how it makes money. Like it gives you the freedom and even just self-confidence to say, okay, here we go.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I'll go back to that in a second. But I will say the other thing that made I realized how lucky I was is that when the news hit about the layoffs, at two different people at two different companies say, I will hire you and create a headcount for you, or I'll be your first client. And so I knew I'd have clients immediately. And that is something I don't take lightly. I'm saying I a lot, but I also just want to say, it's a company that I started and I co-own with my two partners, Tanja Thigpen and Nella Reyes. We all worked at Wondery. We're all impacted by layoffs. I also previously worked with Tanja at Apple Podcasts. Actually hired her before, and then a month later, I was like, I'm on Netflix. But there are two women that I trust implicitly, and we all each have our lane, and which we have a lot of experience in and are really good at. And so it just really allows us to work so well together. Offer a different variety of services. I should just say Type C is a podcast production company, but we work across mediums. Video podcast, audio podcast, production services, but also strategy. So sometimes we have clients like Futuro. Nella's working with them throughout the year on their slate of shows, which they're releasing for the first time independently versus having a partner. We're actually working with John Bewan in the next season of Seen on Radio, doing marketing video strategy for them, kind of 360 support for another kind of high profile company that I can't mention by name yet. But it's been amazing. And some jobs are small. Some just need a video strategy guidance. Some just need audience analysis, or they need everything. We've been really lucky because we're working with clients we like. We're working with clients and their shows that we would be listening to anyway. Working on things that I think will have a real impact in this world that really help us understand things better, understand each other better. So getting laid off was challenging, but I'm so much happier than I've been.
And you're making your own hours, right? I think also, when you reach a certain level, right, of work, to be honest, in corporate, you either make enough money that you can outsource a lot of your own domestic labor, right? Because you have to, or you get to a level of success where you can make your own hours. Because after a certain age, right, we all have parents that are aging or kids or, all sorts of things. And I think that the average 40-hour work week was designed for one person with a supported family, right? Traditionally. So when you think about that, right, and all the work we want to make and all the stuff we want to do in the world is something where it's like, okay, wait, but who's making dinner, right? And so, I do think there's a big realistic aspect of it. And when you go out on your own, it's when you can finally be like, okay, well, it's 4:00 and I have stuff to do, and this email is in emergencies. There's no podcasting emergencies.
There's no podcast emergencies. Yeah,
there's no podcasting emergencies.
No. And I'm really lucky. I shall say. Shout my husband Brian, who is majority cooking anyway. But it's been crucial. And one of the first conversations we had, me and my partners, is that the ethos of this company is that life comes first, and we fit work around it. Like every Thursday, I work from my parents' house, so we're leaving my mom's caregiver, and I make breakfast for my dad. and lunch for my day between meetings. I'll take them out and do errands. I don't think I could have done that or arranged my schedule that way. And I'm still working, but lightly on a Thursday. Or I make sure that I can end my Friday every day and pick up my daughter, Zora, at 3 p.m. and at work for the rest of the day. So we can start the weekend. So yeah, that was huge. And yeah, every other place I worked at, if I took a vacation, I would still take it, but the amount of guilt I'd have about being away.
Oh, yeah. Or just the dread of like, what emails am I going to return to?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah. That dread doesn't really go away because emails, but
yeah, but at least I think when it's your company, it's like, you know, there's at the end of the day, like it's yours, right? And I also wanted to ask, you know, in terms of that switch of going from corporate to entrepreneur, how have you seen, you know, the work that people are buying and obviously we've talked about the climate, but in terms of the kinds of content, have you seen that shift since the Wondery layoffs?
Yeah. So, I mean, the other thing is like, right, we're not pitching things ourselves. We are, necessarily we're making things for clients. And I'm working on a limited series for one client when I recognize how rare it is right now, because otherwise it seems sort of like a desert. So I know like it's really rare to be working on limited series, but people are still making limited series. And we're working on a video narrative podcast, a video first narrative podcast, which I'm really excited about. Okay. With a well-known content creator.
Great.
You know, a lot of people are still making like opinion podcasts. You know, we're not making those. But I will say the one thing I see in my work, also looking at other people who start small production companies is, yes, there are times where budgets were inflated, like 2019, 2021. Yes, let's have a right sizing. But the pendulum has swung the other way for a lot of places where people, I won't name names, but there are companies that know exactly what it takes to make this kind of high level quality work. Mm-hmm. And they're offering a quarter of what it actually takes to make the work, hoping that people are desperate enough to say yes.
Wow.
And that's been really disheartening to see. Yeah. Because then you know the circumstances you're putting people in. Yeah. And then you want them to overwork themselves for, you know, a fraction what you would have paid them even a year ago. And so there's still lots of stuff being made, but it's like
there's a squeeze. It's a squeeze for sure.
Squeeze. Yeah.
For sure. And we've had people from AIR come on, the Association of Independent Radio Professionals, and you know, they publish a rate guide because there isn't, you know, we don't have a union, right? In terms of audio, right? In terms of what I do in audience development, like there's only 10 or 15 people in the world who do what I do. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so it's definitely one of those things where like, you know, it's so important to talk to each other. It's so important to understand what the industry is doing. TPA does that, right? There's so many different resources. So it's vitally important for anybody freelancing or who has their own company to tap in and be like, hey, what are you charging? What's the going rate for this, right? Because when we don't have those conversations, somebody's going to take it for less money and everybody loses because of it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember I was at Netflix and before I got there, someone was like, oh, we had this show, this company produced a show, and they did 5 episodes for $10,000. So why are you asking this much money to a season? Like, well, that was exploitative charges. Yeah. And they said yes, that probably because they thought you'd give them more work. And that's unfair. Yeah. Because you're, you know, a $1 billion company and they're the exact opposite. So yeah, I was just thinking, I think it means also, I understand the tremendous amount of pressure everyone is under, and it feels like we're all under threat. I mean, I received an email about Amazon about redundancies in AI, and I better use AI every day, but there will be redundancies, right? So I understand the threats that people are under. Yeah. But people in these positions of power still need to kind of hold the line and say, but this is what it takes to do the work we need. Yeah. The quality we need. Because otherwise, the quality's not going to be great. It's not going to work anyway.
Yeah, and audiences know. Audiences know. We all know when you're listening to a great podcast, you cannot stop listening to it, right? It just becomes your whole personality. You're going to binge it. You're going to find reasons to go on extra walks, to walk to the grocery store. You're going to do everything you possibly can to listen to that podcast, right? Yeah. And when something's just mediocre, you're like, okay. Yeah. And I think if we have enough mediocre content, the overall industry does suffer. So it is something where, and then it drops down again. And then you get a wave of indie creators doing original, unique things that own their own shows that then build their own production. It's like, we could go through that all again, which we may be on the brink of that.
We are. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think it's something where it's so important to check in with your community, right? Join the TPA, join AIR. They publish a free rate guide. We had an episode where we talked about it. We talked about how much, editors get paid, right? And it's just really important, right? And obviously on the production side, you're putting together so many different elements, right? And that's where your background probably really comes in handy because you've put together those budgets from the corporate side. So you know what goes into them. You know what kind of resources companies are evaluating for those purchases as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Nigel, I want to ask you next, what's one key move or metric or even a mindset that's made the biggest impact on your podcasting career and the success of the shows that you've made and now Type C?
I think the biggest thing is what I learned at NPR is that if I hear a no, try to really understand what's behind that no, because it could sometimes become a yes. So is it a no because of a capacity thing, of a budget thing, of a legal thing? What is the issue? Because if you're talking to someone and they feel really heard and you're like, well, I think we can figure this out together. Sometimes that no becomes a yes. And I would stop hearing the word no so much and more I'm not sure. I don't know how we can do this. And then everything becomes that much more about sphere of collaboration.
Yeah.
Versus kind of territorial. And so I really brought that lesson to every other place I've worked at. And it's been really effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nigel, what's something that people don't know about what you do?
That's a really great question. I think one of the things that my purpose, my professional purpose on earth is sort of be to find creative storytellers who have really important stories or perspectives to share and helping them bring it to fruition. And I've done that my entire career, including documentary film and podcasts. But sometimes that doesn't always mean that we are working together. I would get pitches at whatever company I was at. And I love this. This is not for us. But let me connect you to so-and-so who, at this company that would love this pitch. Or this is not for me, but I have the perfect editor in mind for you. So I just love storytelling so much. And this world is so hard to navigate always. And especially now, it feels like things are resetting every 3 months. And so I really feel like it's our duty kind of, as you're saying earlier, just to look out for each other.
Yeah.
And even now, I start Type C, I'll meet with people. I remember this story when you pitch it to Wondery. Where is it at? Oh, it's kind of stalled. Let me help me figure out how to get going. Not because there's anything for Type C or me to do on it, because I just want to hear it when it comes out.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I do that I don't think people know about me necessarily, but I think it's really important, especially as maybe it's part penance for working at least tech companies.
No, but
also
the fact that you're doing it for the love of the story. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I also just feel I don't know, kind of woo-woo. Everything comes back to you, right? Because I want someone to do something. I mean, people have done that for me in the past, right? And let's get that good, karma and mojo going for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're such a young industry, right? A lot of people feel in general, podcasting is so collaborative, and it is for sure. And also, it's the people that build the ladder, right? That are going to get to climb the ladder that much faster.
Yeah.
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 100%. Well, Nigel, if you had to start over today, what would you do differently to grow faster or smarter?
Like I mentioned before, I came from the documentary film world. And, no one was really listening to podcasts on YouTube in 2016, right? But around 2018, you could see the movement going there, right? Or even NPR would see all of our youngest and most of our audience members were on a Tiny Desk. Some didn't even know what NPR was, but they knew what Tiny Desk was.
Yep.
And so I started trying to push for we should do more video, have video for our podcasts. And I, of course, hindsight being 2020, but I wish I had, especially with my background, really push harder for earlier experimentation in video. I think especially when it comes to narrative audio, I think we all saw this, but I know I was kind of ringing alarm bells as early as 2019 that if there are more and more people consuming this podcast content on YouTube and they're only consuming interview chat shows, especially Gen Zers, people 25 under, then they're going to grow up only wanting to really consume those shows. And I don't want narrative podcasts to get left behind. And that's a thing I brought up at every other job, and especially at Wondery. And, I just kept hearing like, oh, other people are working on it. Other people are working on it. And I wish I had just like pushed harder. And then when I became the head of Limit Series at Wondery last year, that's really, I was like, we're focusing attention on this. Like, this is like, now I can say and set the agenda. And that work, unfortunately, was not able to continue because of the layoffs. But it's something that we're really actively working on right now with that show I talked about, the creator, but also this other media partner.
It's very exciting. Well, Nidri, what are you excited about coming up in the podcasting industry?
I mean, not to sound too self-promotion, but I'm really excited about our shows that we have that we're producing. Because I think they're really exciting shows that also will continue to push the medium forward.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about the $25 million endowment that NPR got recently. So excited for my former colleagues and friends that work there. There's been so much uncertainty across public media. And this is not a cure-all, but it is really hard to do your best work under lots of uncertainty. And this doesn't resolve all of it, but I hope it's a little bit of a lever that eases that for people. I'm excited about other people who are starting their companies up like Type C. I looked and saw the other day, there was someone I used to work with as a contractor, production manager for Wondery named Mariah Gossett, who I was like, they're freaking fantastic. They're so smart. They can do anything. And I just looked them up recently, and like Mariah started their own podcast production company with a friend, and they're doing gangbusters. So I love this model. I think it could be successful for people. So those are things I'm excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nidri Eaton, CEO of Type C Studios, thank you so much for joining us here on PodBiz.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.